Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for this month's LCMS Youth Webinar. We're so excited this month to be joined by Dr. Grant Carey, a Director of Christian Education who is currently serving as the Associate Director for the DC program at Concordia, Texas, as well as a Professor of Religion there. Before coming to Concordia, Grant also spent 12 years in parish ministry in a DC capacity. And my name is Amy Gray. I'm the Media Director here at the LCMS Youth Ministry Office. Looking forward to spending some time with you today talking about a tough topic, porn to lecturing to youth, dealing with the lure of pornography. So thankful that Grant is open and interested in speaking on this topic that's so needed to talk about both amongst youth ministry as well as adults as well. So would you join me in prayer today, and we will get started. Heavenly Father, I thank you for today. I thank you for the opportunity to gather through this means of communication and talk about youth ministry and youth and people that we care about. God, thank you for how you have created and designed us, mind, body, and spirit. Pray that you would protect and strengthen us in our bodies to use them according to your will in ways that love and care for others. Lord, would you lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. I thank you for Grant, for the ways that he cares for youth and young adults around him, and pray that you would bless him now as he leads their time. In your name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Great. Thanks, Amy.
You bet. All
right. So, like Amy said, Grant, and here to talk about porn. And I've kind of become the porn guy in many circles, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it kind of came by accident. It kind of came by just having some students that wrestled with this, and so walking them through it and talking more about it and presenting more on it. And so, wrestling with my own issues when I was younger, and then knowing how to deal with that with teens I worked with, and now college students still who wrestle with that. And so as we jump in today, we're going to look at that, and I'll tell you some of my experience as well. But I'm calling this Porn to Love, because we go from porn to what it looks like to share the gospel, to really be grace-centered people, especially here in our Lutheran body. So I want to start off this a definition of porn and what that really means. It comes from a Greek word, pornonia, which really means a selling off, a cheapening of sexuality, because God designed sexuality to be such a good thing, a great thing, and porn really hijacks that. And that's really what we're going to look at today of what that looks like in hijacking. And to open up, I got a story. I was teaching confirmation a few years ago, and in our church body, we always say, God is good all the time, right? And so I was trying to illustrate that sex is good, that sex is something that God created. And so I guess I made the mistake of to all our students saying, sex is good, repeat after me, sex is good, because I wanted them to see that it's not this evil thing, it's not this bad thing, but that God created it in the right context. And as we're going, one of the parents in the back, the moms, yells out, sex is good all the time, and just one of these things. But we had to then talk, well, okay, in the right concept, in the right context as we look at this. So porn really just being a cheapening of God's gift. The literal meaning of pornography, porn literally means harlot, and graphy, if you know, means writing. So in those days, it was really writing about a harlot. They didn't have images. It was more about, think about like more 50 Shades of Grey kind of things that were going on, writing about sexual experiences and people getting excited about that. We call that now, mommy porn in today's day. So we're going to look at this. Here's our three objectives, what we're really going to talk about today. First, to talk about the importance of talking about, because we don't talk about it enough in the church, about addressing it. And then especially with our teens, because they're struggling with it, they're wrestling with it, and we don't provide an outlet many times of what this actually looks like. Exploring why it's so dangerous and prevalent, and we'll look at that. And then lastly, some different ways that we can address this. So let's jump into this. I want to give you some stats to start off. 12% of all websites on the internet are pornographic. That's a lot of sites. This is a couple years old. It's actually gone way up since then. Here's another one. Every second, over $3,000 is being spent on porn. If you look at that, every second, $180,000 a minute, $10.8 million an hour, and $3 billion a day being spent on pornography. That's exponentially a lot of money on something that is so cheapening to God's gift of sexuality. And so it's really an issue we need to talk about more in the church. 1/3 of all internet downloads are pornographic. That's huge, right? The average age at which a child first sees porn is 11. I've actually heard the latest stat is 9 now, which scares me to death. I've got 2 young girls. For them to be able to view porn that early on is very scary, and so something we need to address in our youth ministries and our messages, and as we really look at what this looks like. So here's another one. 40 million Americans are regular visitors to porn sites. That number, could fluctuate. I would think it's actually higher than that. And here's an interesting stat. 1 in 3 are actually women. We actually oftentimes think of this as a male issue, but really women struggle with this as well. Here at our university, where I work at Concordia, I've had several girls in our intro. We have what we call a program interview for them to enter the program. And one of the things we ask is, do you struggle with any of these types of issues that we need to know about and seek help? And we've actually had at least 3 girls, and there's probably more, but 3 girls that really say, yeah, I struggle with pornography. And they're going into ministry. I actually had one. I gave this presentation last year at the National Youth Gathering, and I had a girl come up afterward and say, yeah, I'm going into church work. She went to a different Concordia, and she said, does that mean I can't go into church work if I still struggle with this? And I told her, absolutely not. No, we all struggle. But with that being said, you do need to seek help. So go find some counseling, go talk to somebody about this and really work with this. So it's important. Yeah, as you can see, a lot of people visit porn sites in a typical month. 70%. That's a lot. It's a very prevalent thing with young men. So we'll look more at that. All right, and 2 very, very fascinating things. The least popular day of the year for viewing porn is Thanksgiving. My guess on this, I don't have any research, but my guess is that it's a time you're with family, you've got football, you're busy, you're eating food, you're not thinking about porn and sex at that time. But then what's fascinating is the most popular day of the week for viewing porn is Sunday. And my guess for this one is that Satan's working, number 1. But number 2, it's the day when we have the most downtime. And so when we have idle time, that's when Satan really works in our minds to give into the temptation and the allure of porn. And so something we really need to wrestle with and work with and pray for. There's a fascinating story from her book, Sex, Lies, and the Media. Eva Marie Emerson recounts the story, and she says this: my friend Jack, with the National Coalition for the Protection of Children and Families, shocked me with the story of his attendance at a religious convention. The manager of the hotel where he had been staying noticed the posters and other paraphernalia he carried around through the lobby early one morning, and then back later again that afternoon. That afternoon, he stopped Jack and asked him what he was doing with all that information on pornography. And Jack told him that he was part of a Christian conference being held in the city. The manager stopped and laughed. He said, "Get real. Porn movies in our hotel are accessed at a higher rate during Christian conventions than any other time." So I think this is a huge issue, not only just for teens, but also for pastors, for men, for women, for young, for old. A lot of people are dealing with this, and so it's something we definitely need to address and talk about. So yeah, let's dive into this a little bit more. I found this is actually from Promise Keepers. They said this, so it's mostly men, but I'd love to see stats with the LCMS. Maybe next time we do the gathering, if they would address this and ask this question on the survey they do with the youth. But here's the question: my church does an adequate job of addressing pornography, and 43% say yes, they do okay with it, and then 57% say no, they don't. My guess is actually that the men going to this conference are churches that are bringing them and encouraging them to go to places like this, but I would guess this number is actually a lot higher for those that disagree that their church actually addresses pornography. I'd love to see what youth groups are actually doing to address it. So yeah, it's something that's very important to talk about, and something that's not. It's actually a taboo subject in many churches, and so something we need to talk about. And why is it so prevalent? Why is it so such an issue? I mean, really three main issues here. It's very accessible, especially with the advancement of a smartphone. You basically have a computer that you can search at any time in your pocket. It's very easy to keep it secret. It's a very, very secret type of sin that nobody has to know about. And then lastly, it's addictive. And we'll jump into this a little bit, but talk about the brain science of pornography and how it's really, there's a lot of chemical reactions going on, and it makes you crave it more and more the more you get into pornography. So we'll look at that in just a bit. There's actually a graph from Time Magazine last year. But as you can see, in 2009 to 2015, pornography searches on just Pornhub jumped 4 times. So 400% in just 6 years of porn searches on this one website. And you can see some of the advancements here of, 2013, 50% of people had smartphones. What I find fascinating is that 2015, actually, Playboy went out of business. They stopped publishing their issues of magazines with nude models because they didn't have to. There was no market for it anymore because people can now get it for free. So yeah, it's a huge issue. So all right, so here's the question: why is it so dangerous? Most people might say, it's not really that big a deal. You're not hurting anybody. But as you can see, we're going to, I'll show you a video. It's from the Dove marketing people. And it's a fascinating video on perception and reality and false reality, really, and unrealistic expectations. So go ahead and watch this. It's only about a minute long. So you can see that most advertising is not reality, and same with pornography. It's just not reality, and so what's so dangerous about it is that when teens are engaging in pornography, they're seeing a false reality, and then when they actually look for healthy sexual relationships later on in their married lives, they're dissatisfied because it's not what they've experienced in the past, and so it can be very damaging to relationships. Especially in marital relationships. So as we look into this a little bit more, here's another question. Is it really so harmful? Most people say, all right, okay, maybe, it might affect that, but is it really that damaging or harmful? Well, Time Magazine, that same one where I got that graph, did a whole series on this, and they said, why young men who grew up with internet porn are becoming advocates for turning it off, and this is a secular magazine, secular study, and what's fascinating is they're seeing that it actually is doing more harm than good, and that people's freedom of expression is actually damaging their relationships as they dive into this more long term. And so here's a fascinating study of Filipino teen boys in porn. They were finding that teen pregnancy was on the rise in the Philippines, premarital sex was on the rise, rape was on the rise, sexual violence was on the rise, sex trafficking was on the rise, cases of HIV are on the rise. And so they were trying to find out what was the root of this problem. And what they came up with was it was actually that the Philippines was the highest case of pornography access for teen boys. And because of this, all these problems came out of that. And what was also fascinating is they found that the churches were doing nothing to address any of these issues, that actually talking about sex, talking about masturbation, talking about sexuality at all was taboo in these churches. And so it just shows that we need to talk about this in helpful ways, because if we don't, they're going to find other ways of expressing and learning about porn from unhealthy sources. So as we look at this a little bit more, a great book if you want to check this out. I make my students read this. I teach a adolescent sexuality class here at the college, and this book's called Hooked: New Science How Casual Sex is Affecting Our Children. And there's a lot of brain science here. We're going to watch a video in just a second, but sexuality is actually a very, it starts in the brain. You've probably heard this before, that sex really, the biggest sex organ you have is your brain. And so go ahead and watch this video. This one's about 3 minutes long, about the science.
Sexual tastes vary from person to person, but with the current pornography epidemic, as some call it, one has to wonder how exactly this may affect our desires and perception of sexuality. Moreover, how does it affect our sex lives? Pornography constitutes about 25% of all search engine requests and is the fourth most common reason people give for going on the internet. And while it may seem to simply facilitate an instinctual sexual response linked to millions of years of evolution, the truth is, pornography has dynamically changed over time, ultimately molding our tastes and desires. The not-so-shocking truth is that pornography has profound consequences for the brain and acts in many ways like a drug. With prolonged exposure, your tolerance is increased, and many often find themselves addicted. Though it's not a physical substance, it leads to the same general loss of control, the compulsiveness to seek out the activity despite negative consequences, and withdrawal when it goes away, much like that of gambling or running, for example. The issue is that continued exposure can cause long-term or even lifelong neuroplastic change in the brain. Dopamine is released as a reward whenever we accomplish something, whether it be eating to sustain life or sexual activity to produce future life. And this dopamine consolidates neural connections in order to drive us to perform the same activity in the future. In other words, it alters and forms the brain cells to motivate certain actions. It rewires your brain. The National Institutes of Health measure drug addictiveness by testing rats. The rat is trained to press a button in order to get a drug, and the harder it works indicates how addictive the substance is. It turns out that the more addictive a drug is, the more dopamine we see released. And while there is, unfortunately, no rat porn that we can give to them, we do know that dopamine is also released during sexual excitement, which pornography plays right into. The more time you spend doing it, the more dopamine gets released, which reinforces the behavior and makes you not only desire it in the future, but require it. And as you begin to imagine these images away from the computer or while having sex, they become reinforced. Furthermore, each orgasm releases even more dopamine, which consolidates the connections made during the session. It's a feedback loop that becomes harder to escape. And just like a drug, your tolerance for visual stimulation has now compounded, making it more difficult to be turned on by reality. Pornography addiction can often lead to finding your mate less attractive. The good news is, it doesn't have to be permanent. Usually when people understand the mechanism and realize it's affecting their relationships, they can stop. The brain is often described as a use it or lose it system because the neural connections you stimulate grow stronger and desire to be activated, while the ones you ignore become weakened. Much like your muscles, which, if sitting still all day, itch for activity, but after prolonged non-use, they become complacent. Luckily, because of this use it or lose it brain, the same neuroplastic system that proliferates these habits can also be used to acquire healthier ones. Got a burning question you want answered? Ask it in the comments or on Facebook and Twitter, and subscribe for more weekly science videos.
All right, so like I said, if you want to know more about that, this book, Hooked, is a great resource. It's short, it's only about 150 pages, but they do a lot of teen stories in there about teens dealing with sexuality and the way, a lot of the emotional breakups that teens have after having sex have to do with the brain and with the oxytocin and the dopamine and all that happens. And what's fascinating is that pornography, they were talking a lot about dopamine, but what they didn't talk about is the oxytocin, because oxytocin is a bonding agent. So think of it this way. God says, it's not good for man to be alone. The two shall become one. And that oneness is actually the oxytocin bonding you together. And so when a couple has sex, there's a chemical reaction that goes on in the brain. And so if they break up or divorce, there's pain that's associated with that because now the brain has to rework itself, and it causes emotional issues. But with pornography, you don't have the oxytocin, you just have the dopamine. And so there's a longing, a missing of connection. Oxytocin is also something like after a baby's born, it needs to be hugged by the mother because the chemicals are released in the brain, and kind of that nurture thing. So there's the oxytocin connection is missing during pornography, but while the dopamine is only growing. So they get out of proportion, which causes imbalances in the brain and can cause depression and things like that. So let's look at some of the side effects of pornography usage. Here's just a few. This is going to sound really very law-based. We'll get more gospel, so hang in there. And it seems doom and gloom, and it's not all that bad. We'll actually talk to that it can be reversed and that these cycles can be fixed. But infidelity, goes way up. Relationships are broken. Divorces go up because of it. Cyber sex is more prevalent because of it. Here's some other ones. Negative perceptions and attitudes, even aggression towards the opposite sex. They did a study with Charles Manson and did some interviews with him while he was in prison before he was executed. And they found that he attributed a lot of his murdering to his pornography addiction at a young age. And so can cause anger and cause depression. And we know, you've heard the studies that our generation is in the biggest form of depression and is the most depressed of any. And I think this is a big reason for that. And so we've got some really work to do as a church. Here's some other ones. Sometimes it can lose jobs. 1/3 of addicts lose their jobs because they're so focused on this and pornography that they can't sustain or think about going on. Financial issues with that. Here's some other ones, less couple trust and cynicism about love, promiscuity, monogamy, all these kinds of issues there. Here's one last slide for you. It makes you prefer fantasy to reality. It helps you normalize things. You feel guilt. It can actually lead to actual addiction, where you're not thinking about anything else. You just need that next high. And then here's a big one. It can cause you to experience erectile dysfunction at age 24. One of the reasons I think we see so many more Viagra ads and things of that sort is because of pornography. 30 years ago, a lot of people didn't struggle with that, but now a lot of people have issues because they're so used to seeing images that they can manipulate to now when they're with a real person, it's not the same, and it's not how they experience their false reality. So let's get real practical. Here's our last section: is how do you really help them deal with pornography? How do you help students that are struggling and wrestling with this issue? And my first question always is do they want to get well? Here's a story from John chapter 5 where Jesus is at the well there in Bethsaida, and there's a bunch of invalids around the pool, and they're trying to get healing from the water, and there's a guy who's been there for many years, it says, and Jesus asks him, do you want to get well? And the guy says, yeah, I just haven't had any help. Nobody's been able to help me. So Jesus says, all right, go, your faith has made you well. And so it's one of those questions. But had he said, I've been here many years, I don't want to get well, then you can't help somebody like that. Think about Shawshank Redemption, if you've ever seen that. And Morgan Freeman's character, when he gets out of prison and then he actually can't handle life there, so he commits a crime to go back because he doesn't know how to get well. He's been so socially conditioned to this one way of life that he doesn't know. And so how do we do this? If somebody is really desperate, then we can do this. Here's some questions to ask, or some excuses people that usually don't want to get well will say. They'll say, I only looked a little bit. And well, all right, a little bit still has an effect, right? As we talked about the brain science, a little bit will contribute to a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, and so that can be dangerous. Or this excuse, it won't really hurt anybody. It's just me. Well, yeah, but it hurts you. It can hurt your spouse later on in life. It could lead to violence, kinds of different issues like that. So at the moment, yeah, you may not be hurting anybody, but in reality you are, spiritually too as well. I deserved it because, I had a long week, or I just finished this, I need a release, or, whatever your excuse may be. Well, yeah, but you don't deserve the problems that come with it, or the addiction that comes with it, right? And so we can rationalize, and that's not always a good excuse. Or what about this? It's someone else's fault. They got me into pornography. They gave it to me. Well, okay, but eventually you have to take responsibility for your own life, and so how can you stop that cycle? Or what about this? It doesn't really matter. Well, actually, it does, because pornography, as we said, short circuits relationships, and so relationships matter. All of life is about relationships. So how can we have the most healthy relationships and be fully whole as much as possible? And so it does matter. And then lastly, I accidentally found it. Okay, sometimes that happens, but sometimes accidentally, purposely happens, right? You'll be talking to a student, they say, yeah, I accidentally came upon it. I don't know what to do, and I wrestled and I struggled with it, and but sometimes in the back of our minds, we're knowing what searches we look for, and so really pressing them on that. Okay, what does that look like? Okay, what were you thinking? Is this really totally innocent? And so these are just some things to think about, or some excuses that happen when people don't want to get well, right? And so here's some other questions to ask, maybe of your youth group. But do you find yourself thinking about sex often, or have you tried to stop and couldn't? Do you find yourself controlled by these? Do you look at the internet or your phone to look at porn, right? Have you read a romantic novel or explicitly sexual magazine? Like we talked about, like the 50 Shades of Grey can even be porn. It doesn't have to be visual. Have you felt guilty after masturbating? All these questions can lead to all right, there's an issue here, and we need to talk more about this. So there's different levels. Before we, anybody who's dealing with porn, we can't say somebody who just came from porn, once or twice, it has a porn addiction. No, there's different levels here. And I would say the first one, all right, is really not a big deal, but we need to really help people not be exposed to it. And that's really hard to do. But how can we, protect our kids, by putting software on our computers, those kinds of things. The middle two are the ones I think you're going to find most in your churches, the occasional use and the intensive use. And then the compulsive use, the last one there, is one I think you should really refer out, refer them to a counselor to get help, encourage them to talk to their parents about that, because this is something that could really affect their lives in long-term ways. And so, but those middle two are probably the ones you're going to deal with the most when it comes to teenagers. And so those two are the ones I'm really going to be talking about as we address some things to deal with that. So I'm going to end here on the 8 ways to help teens deal with porn. And before we get into that, I want to show you this graph, because a lot of times when we look at helping people deal with pornography, we only deal with like 1 or 2 of these sections rather than a holistic approach. And so I want to really look and talk to you about what does it look like to holistically help somebody with their pornography addiction. So, I've heard examples of teens before where they were only told to address the God side, where they came to their youth leader, youth pastor, and they said, I'm dealing with pornography. And their person, this happens mostly in non-Lutheran churches, but they say, well, you should pray about it more, or you need to read the scripture more. And if you do that, then you won't have to wrestle or struggle as much anymore, right? And that's just dealing with the God side. That stuff absolutely is important, but only addresses one part of the issue, one part of our holistic self, right? To deal with the self part, asking questions of what does it look like to really dig deeper? What's behind that? I actually had lunch yesterday with one of our current students here at Concordia, and he was talking about his porn struggles, and he said, you know what? Yeah, my girlfriend, we're having a rocky relationship, and that led him to struggle with pornography and masturbation, and so there was a part of him that, as we dug deeper, he felt alone, he felt depressed. And because of that, his way to compensate was to go to pornography to feel that dopamine high. And so what are some of the deeper issues going on? It could be abuse earlier on in life that need to be addressed and talked through with a counselor, or, just some self issues of self-esteem. So what are some things to really talk about that? The third one here, mentors in the yellow section there. Are there people in that person's life that can really talk with them, really keep them accountable, really help them to grow and pray with them? And then the last one is the peers. Do they have a group that they can talk about this with, that they can feel safe with? Here's a big part of this, as we talked about before, is that a lot of times these teens don't have good community because they're so isolated now and only talking on their phones or on social media. And so that lack of intimacy in their lives leads to trying to fulfill that within pornography. And so having a good peer group, a small group or whatever in your church is important for them. So as we talk about these 8 different ways, keep in mind this holistic way of doing this. So, all right, here's number 8. We'll go backwards in order. Number 8, talk about sexuality often with your teens, right? Matthew 5 says, even if you look at a woman lustfully, you've committed adultery with her in your heart. So I think a lot of times we focus on, hey, don't have sex before marriage, don't do this, right? And we say, all right, they're good. They know what they should expect, right? We talked about the 6th commandment, but in reality, this is a daily thing that they're wrestling with. So how do we really get to the heart of the issue? It's not just about not having sex. It's about a heart issue of even looking at someone lustfully and looking. So how do we talk about that more? So, because the more you talk about it, the less awkward it gets. I mean, you may have to start that conversation of saying, hey, repeat after me. We're going to say some crazy words. Everybody say sex. Everybody say masturbation. All right. And they may feel awkward at first, but the more they verbalize, the more they talk about it in this safe place, then they feel comfortable being able to then open up and talk and share. And it doesn't end up like the Philippine culture where it was all taboo and repressed, right? So talk about it often in youth groups or in messages or whatever. Here's number 7, listen to them. Listening is a huge part of it, right? James here says, listen more than you talk, right? And how often do we as leaders or pastors or DCEs, we want to just give advice. We want to give the spiritual answers. We want to just make everything okay and fix it. But oftentimes just listening, asking questions can be the best route, because then they feel valued, they feel cared. They're going to open up more. They're going to share more. They're going to get deeper in their life and hopefully get more into that reconciliation and recovery there. So just listening is a huge part of it. Here's number 6, encourage them to flee. St. Paul tells us this in 1 Corinthians, flee from all sexual immorality. What this really means is he doesn't say just quietly walk away. No, if you think about fleeing is turning around. It's being aggressive about it. It's running from it, right? It's being intentional. It's being quick. And so how can we do this better? That when you're tempted, when you have that trigger, first identifying what those triggers are, and then finding ways to flee from those, to eliminate those. And they may be a phone that, you have to put some software on. It may be a computer in a bedroom. Here's some examples, right? There's been studies done that having computers in the bedroom is bad for teens, right? Porn use goes up. So how can you have that computer more in a public location? And now with laptops, it's a little bit harder because it's not just desktop era anymore. But, maybe you have a rule with your own kids of no technology in the bedroom, right? I've recently started doing this with my daughters of no technology in your bedroom. You have to charge all your devices at night in our room. And so that way they get better sleep. They're not tempted, late at night. And maybe that's something you could share with your parents that you work with of your teenagers and really helping them to really, what are some ways to help them flee and some protections to put in place. So number 5, encourage them to be transparent. Romans 3:23 says all have sinned and fall short, right? So because of this, we can share our baggage with each other because we all have messed up. And I think pornography has been one of these taboo subjects we can't talk about. We can talk about, I gossip sometimes, but to say, I deal with porn, that's going to put you on a different level and be judged. But I think it's becoming more and more prevalent, so it's becoming more and more safe to talk about. So that may mean that you have to first be more transparent with them before they'll be transparent with you. And so how do you maybe share some of your story so that they can then feel safe to be transparent as well? And this can be done in small groups as well. I can remember the first time I was leading a small group of high school boys, and we're in a circle, and I start sharing some of my struggles, and then one by one, all the guys are like, "You struggle with that? Yeah, me too, me too, me too, me too." And finally, everybody admitted to it. So we just had a wide open discussion, and every week then we could then check in with each other. And so we had this support group of guys to be transparent with. So I think that's the value of the church, and what we can offer the world is that ability. Number 4 is this: help them be committed or to plan. The old saying, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So Romans 12 says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. St. Paul got that brain science part of it. So how can we help them plan better? This doesn't mean being perfect. They're going to mess up, but how can we help them more towards progress? Here's a fascinating graph right here. Let's get back to that. A fascinating graph that says, if they're porn free for 4 days, it goes down significant. But then if you get to 12 to 14 days, it goes down even further. So it goes down 60%. It gets easier, and it doesn't completely get easy, or you're not completely healed until 3 to 4, 6 months, somewhere in that range. And so it's about rewiring that brain again, right? And so by getting away from pornography, by fleeing and building up the pattern of non-usage, you can then become more porn-free because the brain has been rewired to live without that and not be satisfied or gratified by that. So what's fascinating is seeing that brain science that you can actually rewire your brain, that it's not permanent. An addiction is not permanent. You can go through a detox. It's tough, but by doing so, you can be fully whole again, which I love. Is just another way that science backs up the redemption quality of God, where he makes us whole. So here's another way of planning and being committed. It might be a great story to share with your teens, but Job 31, where he starts off and he says, I've made a covenant with my eyes, and he goes on, to talk about the ways he's dealt with lust, but this is just a way of making that covenant. All right, so let's just go one day at a time. Let's talk about it. I'll check in with you for the first couple weeks. All right, now we'll check in once a week. Now we can check in once a month. What does that look like to develop some kind of plan to have that covenant with your eyes? So here's number 3: encourage them toward accountability. And James 5, says, pray for one another and confess your sins to one another, right? And so what does that look like? If they come up to you and they say, yeah, I'm really wrestling with this, struggling with this, I want some help them with this, all right? There's some software. Here's a bunch of different sites. This will all be online later on, so if you miss it or aren't writing that down, you can get it later on. But XX Church or Triple X Church is done by a youth pastor who said, I'm tired of this. I've been dealing with this. I want to help people. Safe Eyes, Covenant Eyes, Freedom Begins Here, Fight the New Drug. All of those are sites where have accountability. Some are free, some are not, but it all puts protection on your computer and then sends a report to someone who you subscribe to that says, all right, here's everything they've looked at. My favorite, though, is the last one there, Ever Accountable. And this is the one I encourage my students to use because it says, every different site, every keyword that maybe was typed up or looked up. And it does cost a little bit. I think it's like $3 or $4 a month, but it's the best one and hardest one to get around because, I know myself, other people know themselves that, yeah, they're going to say, I want this, but as it comes down and they're in that secret sin, they're going to feel guilt and shame if they feel like they messed up. So they're going to try and find ways to avoid it and go around it. So there's that. So another one here is Our Tribe. And actually you can text Our Tribe to 33733 and you can get a whole bunch of videos. And they're 1 minute to 3 minute videos of a guy. His name's Alex Larza, I think. And he shares, ways that he's overcome porn. He shares more about the brain science, goes a little bit more in depth, shares ways of fighting that. And so I highly recommend his videos as well. So there's that. All right, let's finish up here. A couple more to go. 2, pray for them and with them. Oftentimes we say, I'll pray for you, but actually pray with them. That's a huge part of that. I love this verse here in Philippians, where it says, don't be anxious, but by prayer and petition, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds, right? I love that. Also gets that brain science of guarding your heart and your mind, right? So pray with them. That's a huge part of mentoring in this. And so the last one here, I know this has been very law-based, but here's the grace, here's the gospel, is help them experience grace, right? When they come to you and they say, yeah, I messed up, or you get that report and they say, I messed up, remind them that, Romans 5, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us, right? He didn't wait for us to clean up our act. He said, no, in the midst of your messiness and pain and suffering and sin, I'm dying for you, right? You don't have to get it all right because I'm getting it all right. And so because of that, he imputes that righteousness on us. And so how do you help them experience grace? By just encouraging them, by walking with them, by sharing the gospel with them, to let them know that they're not broken. A lot of this is about identity. And so how do you help them, remind them that their identity is built in Christ and it's not based upon what they've done or how they've messed up, right? So basically, just to remind you too, remembering this holistic way of really working with someone, addressing their spiritual self, their inner self, their leader, mentor self, and then also with their community. So what does that look like? All right, that's, I think, all I've got. It is time for questions and discussion. So let's go.
All right, thank you so much. As many of you are already using the chat box on the left-hand side, you'll see that that's a place where you can type comments or questions, and Grant will do his best to answer them. We've already received one that I'll share with you, Grant, and you talked a little bit about the idea of accountability groups or people getting together. If you could share more on your thoughts about a congregation creating a group that gathers weekly to pray, hold each other accountable, and encourage each other, how would you go about structuring that time together?
Yeah, that's a great thought. Great question, Micah. I would say it would look different in every church, every congregation based upon size and demographics and all that. But, whether it's if it's teens that are struggling, like maybe that small group of boys I was talking about, just having them gather maybe at your house or, somewhere and just praying and talking about struggles or you could even do, the danger with doing like a porn anonymous kind of group is that, well, then you're known as that porn group and, people might see you. So you could maybe do something like that, but maybe call it something else, some kind of accountability or men's, group. Definitely keep it gender distinct. Find some kind of way. You could also have code words, my high school boys would call it the monster. When they had failed, they're like, yeah, the monster attacked again this week, and that way the girls didn't really know what was going on. And we kind of had our code word of, so they didn't actually have to say, pornography or masturbation or any of that. So there's different ways to do that, but just, I'd say getting together at all, having a text group or just sending out weekly texts encouraging, so.
Grant, you've shared, high school youth is who you've met with. Do you have a recommended age of when to start talking about these kinds of issues in your congregational setting?
Yeah, great question. I would say even, 5th or 6th grade is a great time to start talking about this because a lot of those kids are already being exposed to it. So how can you, in an age-appropriate way, start talking about, images they may see online and what to do with that, or talking about body image, talking about, the lie of pornography or the lure. And they may not be feeling those feelings of sexuality yet, but they will be soon. And so, just giving them the tools to be able to really address those as they come up in their lives and the temptations. And so, absolutely. I think, 5th, 6th grade is a great time. And here's the thing is we often don't talk about it until high school. If we do talk about it and by then it's too late. And so, early is good.
Micah, I'm not sure if this is a follow-up question on any advice specific to pastors regarding your question before about groups or just in general. I think it'd be great to talk about encouragement and advice for pastors, for church workers, for those leaders of the church who may themselves be struggling with this issue, or trying to both lead as well as fight this?
Yeah. See, that's a tough one. And like in the research that I've done, like that hotel study I told you about, many pastors do struggle with pornography. And it's a hard one because you don't want to get up on Sunday morning in your pulpit and say, hey guys, I'm a sinner just like you. I struggle with pornography, because there's certain things you just do and do not share with your parishioners, because you are, that leader of the church there, and that person appointed by Christ to lead and shepherd. But there are maybe some people you're closer to that you may be able to talk to, or have an accountability group, maybe some of your elders or close friends, or maybe even people outside of your church, in case you're worried about that getting out. So finding a group where you could really just be yourself outside of your members might help as well. But I definitely think, having people where you could talk about it and really be accountable is important. Maybe even having the software issues as well. But that's what I would say if it's pastors. I don't know your exact question that he's asking, but if it's just in general, the pastors working with parishioners as well, I mean, I would say this would apply as well to speaking from the pulpit of I know there's a lot of you that wrestle with this issue. Come talk to me. Let's have a dialogue. I won't judge you or look differently at you, but let's work through this, because this is a real issue in lives, and this is destroying relationships. So how can we really be proactive about it? So yeah, hopefully that helps.
Yeah, he shared some more thinking about pastors helping parishioners who are struggling. Obviously, private confession absolution, but are there other things?
Yeah, those are great things. Like I said, counseling is a big part of it, because oftentimes there's some self issues to work on. The accountability, like I talked about, groups. Just like I said, a lot of times pornography comes because of lack of intimacy in life. So how can you connect them to more people to have deeper relationship with? A men's group is always great especially with guys, to really help with these issues and really have accountability. So if you don't have a men's group at your church, maybe that's something worth looking into and starting. So, yeah.
Okay, Wesley here is following up on something that you had asked previously was, have you ever felt guilty over masturbating? And the only problem of, if you feel guilty about it, how do we talk to youth about masturbating, whether or not they're feeling guilty, and what is right or wrong?
Right. I guess that could be taken out of context. Obviously, for the most part, teens are going to feel guilty about it, especially early on. Now, the more you do that, the more you engage in porn, you're not going to feel as guilty. But I do feel like the Holy Spirit works within us, and there's always going to be that naggingness as you're dealing, and the problem gets worse and worse. But it's basically what I was asking there was just, if you've masturbated and you deal with that, then the guilt's going to come. And so I guess I see your side there of saying, if you're masturbating but you're not feeling guilt, are they going to not feel repentant of any sort? And no, that's definitely something to address and talk about. So that's probably a bigger issue, and they're probably maybe to that addictive state. But hopefully all are feeling some kind of guilt because of that. And so, yeah, hopefully that helps and addresses that.
Anything else? He just has a general, how do we talk to youth about masturbation? Anything specific more to that? I mean, you have touched on it, but.
Yeah, no, I would, to add upon that, I would say it's best to split up the guys and girls. Have a guy only talk and a girls only talk, because, you can address it in a larger group, but people aren't going to ask questions. They're not going to dialogue if they know the other sex is there. And a lot of times females don't get the male brain as much either. And so the things that guys might say, the girls are going to take out of context or take wrongly, and then they're going to have a different view of guys, and that may not be the best thing. So definitely separating is always a good thing. And just having some real talks. There's some great resources out there, some video series, some books to go through, to just talk about it. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you all for the questions. Let's take a few more moments here if you're typing or have something else on your mind, but otherwise really appreciate the interaction and thoughts and Grant, just how you've addressed the different issues.
Yeah.
Okay, well, certainly if other questions come up at a later time, or even as you're thinking about this later on today or in the days to come, you can see Grant's email address here on this slide, grant.carey@concordia.edu. Feel free to continue the conversation with him. Also, the Youth Ministry Office is also here to assist you however we can. youth.ministry@lcms.org is the email address for you with that. And also, I should say the Youth eSource is a great resource for you if you're looking for youth ministry resources. That's from our office and provides preludes and resources for you and your group. Our next webinar, we're going to take a break in July and come back the end of August. On August 23rd, again at noon Central, we'll be talking about faith on the field, the vocation of an athlete with Pastor Bob Hiller. Bob was able to present and talk about this to youth themselves at the 2016 LCMS Youth Gathering, and now we'll be speaking to adult leaders about what it means to encourage your youth in their vocation as athlete, as well as how sometimes that may be in conflict with where their time is spent and where their energy is spent. And so I'm really looking forward to that conversation coming up the end of August. Until then, we hope you have a great summer. Thank you so much for being with us today and for the ways that you support young people in your area. Pray that you would continue to be blessed and continue in the work that God has given you to do. Grant, thank you so much again for your time as well.
Thank you. And thanks for being here, everyone.